Hello YouTube. In this video you can see photographs from the surface of planet Venus taken to the Earth from Soviet spacecraft. As for the photos from the surface of Venus, there are not as many as we would like, but nevertheless they are there. First, let's talk about how things happen in the Soviet space activities. On October 22nd, 1975, the Soviet interplanetary space station Venera 9 approached the surface of Venus at close range, lowering a descent lander into it. The device or apparatus made a soft landing on the side of Venus, illuminated by the sun but invisible from Earth, where a few minutes later it began to take a photo panorama from the surface of the planet. Well, these images were the world's first images taken to our planet from the surface of Venus. At the landing site of the spacecraft, it can be seen that this part of the planet has a rocky surface. Scientists suggest that such a landscape of large rocks stretched across the entire planet, as there is increased geological activity on Venus. The apparatus was able to stay on Venus for 53 minutes. Then communication with it was interrupted. In the same month, in the same year, namely on October 25, 1975, following the Venera 9 station, another spacecraft, Venera 10, landed on the surface of Venus. It landed in another area of the planet, 2,200 kilometers from the Venus 9 landing site. The apparatus also conducted a photo panorama from Venus, taking a series of pictures. It managed to stay operational on the surface of this hot planet for only 65 minutes. And these images were taken by the Venera 13 spacecraft on March 1, 1982. Venera 13 functioned on the surface of Venus longer than previous spacecraft, 2 hours and 7 minutes. It can be noted that the Soviet spacecraft on Venus did not function too long. The thing is that the average temperature on Venus is plus 460, minus 475 degrees. At the same time, the pressure on the surface is 89 atmospheres. 89 atmospheres. Therefore, the craft, it can be said, it got to burn up on the surface of the planet. During the research work of the Venera 13 spacecraft, something unusual happened. In the picture, there is a semicircular detail in the center. This part was a protective cover that protects the camera of the apparatus from the hot atmosphere during landing. When it was time to photograph the surface, the lid automatically detached and flew forward. But this elongated structure on the left in the picture, resembling a ladder, it's the so-called mechanical paw. It stretches forward, descending to the ground, analyzes data on the composition of the soil. At least that's how it should have been. But here's the thing. The semicircular protective cover fell on the surface where the soil analysis was supposed to be carried out. And all this tool did was analyze the composition of this very protective cover. After the Soviet spacecraft, nothing else was sent to Venus. For example, NASA is interested in Mars, where they send their rovers to. Although Venus is about the same distance from Earth as Mars, the reason for everything is the high temperature on the surface of Venus. Who knows? Maybe Venus is more scientifically valuable than Mars. I have other videos about Venus and very strange observations and possible signs of life from that planet, noted by the Russians long ago, by the way. Well, the USSR was doing well with this planet compared to Mars. Judging by the fact that Soviet developers of electronics capable of operating in the event of an atomic war had their hands on the creation of the apparatuses that went to Venus spacecraft. There is a hypothesis that the flights to Venus were, among other things, a test of the functioning of the corresponding circuits and components in extreme conditions. I'm stating views expressed by those who are interested in the Soviet space program. So that's what I have. There's not much more than that. But there are some other comments that I'd like to present to you. There was this entire industry, the space industry in the USSR, which was all that it was doing, just space exploration. All these flights are, were for the main business. That was for the military space use purposes. The goal was to catch up with the United States in nuclear weapons and similar developments. The Soviet leaders spared no money, and the best brains from all over the country were engaged. And then USSR disintegrated in 1991. Design teams broke up, production was curtailed. There is no money right now. Well, there is no USSR now. There's Russia and remaining countries that formed the Soviet Union. And at least in Russia, there is no purpose as such. Although they're coming up with new programs, very interesting hopes and dreams. Let's see the practicality. At the Soviet time, the purpose of the civilian space program was to demonstrate the superiority over the Soviet system over capitalism. It did not work. By the way, about Soviet space exploration and Venus. You see, later Soviet probes explored the atmosphere of Venus as part of the Vega project. Balloons with scientific equipment drifted in the atmosphere of Venus for several days. It was a big project to explore Venus. Note that the duration of the descent vehicles increased from time to time. There's another question that I've read, expressed, very interesting. Why are there any acids in the atmosphere of Venus under terrible pressure and enormous temperature? What keeps this aggressive atmosphere there with the relatively low gravity of Venus? The entire dense atmosphere was blown away from Mars. So people think that space scientists don't know that much about space. That's why we have these ideas about comets and so forth. And that's the fact, but at least we're trying to learn. But I want to add something. The event that I described, 1975, that's when it took place. It was only 30 years after 1945, when the most horrible World War ended, and the USSR was in ruins. My father, he was a young boy at that time, but he remembered. And he told me a lot of things too. It's not just the books that I rely on. And I talked to other people. 30 million people perished in the country due to this war. But 30 years later, their spacecraft reached Venus. Today, the Russian space program is but a shadow of what once was. But again, Russia is not USSR. And when we lived in the USSR, people often said that, okay, we make rockets, but we should also make consumer goods. And maybe that's why the country fell apart, because people have to be content and satisfied. But they had a great space program. And in my videos, I will continue to describe it, including experiences of the cosmonauts, very brave, very educated people, quite outspoken, sometimes more than those in the United States. China is silent, about experiences they had. And will do my best to bring you interesting videos on the subject, and of course the paranormal phenomenon in outer space. Thank you for your attention to my work. If you can support my research, you can do so to the links you will find in the description to this video. Please subscribe to my channel. Please like my videos.